Yo, 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 welcome back to the Bring the Sink podcast, episode 2. We got a good one for you guys today. We got the end of the regular season grades, part 2. This time we're doing the NFC, and you guys already know we're going clockwise on the compass, north, east, south, and west, and we're starting off with the NFC North. We're starting off with the Chicago Bears. So let's get right into it. First and foremost, I do want to thank you guys so much for listening to episode 1 and for all of your feedback. I truly appreciate every single one of y'all. And hopefully, we can keep the consistency going. We can keep it rolling, and we can only get better from here. So let's get to it. So the Chicago Bears 2025 end of the regular season grade, I have to give them an A. I have to give them an A+. I mean, you got a Coach of the Year candidate with Ben Johnson. You had your number 1 overall pick in Caleb Williams make ginormous strides at the quarterback position after struggling last year with incompetent coaching such as Shane Waldron and Matt Eberflus. And this time, this hire with Ben Johnson, it was a grand slam. It was out of the park. Ben Johnson is looking like one of the best coaches in the league already in his first year, and he looks exactly like the guy that you want running your organization and your team. So I really love the running game that they got going on too. I mean, they have a two-headed monster back there with DeAndre Swift and Kyle Monangai. It's I think Kyle Monangai, that 7th round pick, man, I believe he's a 7th round pick. You might have to correct me if I'm wrong. I might have to fact check myself on that later. But Kyle Monangai and DeAndre Swift have been awesome behind that awesome O-line that the Bears built this year. And it's just been a lot of fun to watch. They've been in so many close games, and they seem to pull it out at the end, kind of similar to the Broncos almost, where they're just pulling out these close games week after week after week, and it's been so much fun to watch. It seems like even when they lose, it's still fun to watch, and I'm not necessarily a Bears fan. I've never really liked the Bears. I've never really hated the Bears either. They had Jay Cutler, which, he was drafted by Denver, and I liked watching him play. So when he went to the Bears, I kind of followed his career, and I continued watching him and seeing him doing the same things that he was doing with Denver, but with the Bears. And it was cool to see, because I'm a big Cutler guy. I love Jay Cutler. So that's been my only experience watching the Bears throughout my entire life. I didn't really pay attention to them. They had that marvelous year. I think they went 12-4 with Mitch Trubisky, and we already know how that playoff run ended kind of preemptively, kind of prematurely, I should say, with the whole double doink. Sorry, Chicago, but throughout my entire life, Chicago hasn't really ever been relevant like that, besides that Super Bowl that they made where they lost against Peyton Manning and the Colts back in 2006, and it was kind of a rainy Super Bowl. But for the most part, it's nice to see as a NFL fan, not just as, a Broncos fan, but as an NFL fan, a fan of football. It's nice to see that the Bears are relevant again, and they got the 2 seed in the NFC. I have to give them an A+. They've been so much fun to watch. The defense has been a little inconsistent. You can ask any guy on the street to name 3 guys on that Bears defense, and they probably couldn't do it. But they've also kind of been decimated by injuries on the defensive side. They have a real weakness at linebackers. The defense is definitely the thing to worry about when it comes to Chicago, and especially when it comes to this upcoming playoff run. They have a tough matchup against their division rival, the Green Bay Packers, here on Saturday night, I believe, which is going to be must-watch television. Even if you're not that much of an NFL fan, it is going to be must-watch television to watch the Chicago Bears going up against the Green Bay Packers in Soldier Field. I will definitely be watching. It's probably going to be frigid cold. I don't know what the forecast is. That first game, or I should say that second game of the season, for the second matchup of the season, I should say, between the Bears and the Packers, it was a dogfight, and that was also one of the candidates for games of the year, where Jordan Love, he went out with an injury at the beginning with a concussion, I believe, and then Malik Willis was kind of tearing it up, and then the Bears were down by 10 with less than 2 minutes to go, and then they scored a touchdown, and then they got the onside kick, and then they tied it up went into overtime. They stopped the Packers. They got the ball back, and then Caleb Williams, Mr. Iceman himself. I love that nickname, by the way. Mr. Iceman himself throws a dot to DJ Moore to end the game. And he called game. He was on his Paul Pierce. He called game. And he won it against the division rivals, one of the oldest, most legendary rivalries in the entire NFL. And we get blessed with another matchup here in a couple of days, or maybe just tomorrow if you're listening to this on Friday. But it should be a good one. I'm very excited, and I'm very excited for the Bears' future. You know, at the end of the day, even if the Bears lose this game against the Packers on Saturday, which is a very real possibility, even if they do, it's not the end of the world. You know, they have a lot of pieces that they can build around, and this season has been one of the best seasons, like I said, in recent memory for the Bears and for Bears fans. And this is only step one. You know, the rebuild is still happening, and even though they're way ahead of schedule, they won 12 games. They're number 2 seed in the NFC. And they're only going to get scarier from here on out. They got a good offensive line. They got good weapons on both at the running back position and at the wide receiver position. Oh, and how can you talk about the Bears without even discussing Colston Loveland? What an amazing draft pick that was. Colston Loveland, he started off slow, as any rookie should. He started off slow, but then he really picked it up, and he's been a real threat both in the red zone and just up the seams for Caleb Williams. And, you know, Caleb Williams, if you look at the stats, he doesn't really have the greatest, like, eye-popping stats. But, you know, at the end of the day, he's in his second year, and these guys are still growing, they're still developing, and he's made ginormous strides, like I said. And I think the Bears are only going to get better from here. So even if they lose on Saturday night and they go one and done in the playoffs, I don't think this season was a failure at all. I'm still giving them an A. All right, next up we got the Green Bay Packers. And this one is kind of tough to grade, I'm not going to lie, because the Green Bay Packers, they started off real hot. They started off as Super Bowl contenders. They started off as a lot of people's picks from the NFC side to go to the Super Bowl. And especially after they made that aggressive move to trade for Micah Parsons, a move that we haven't seen the Packers make in a very, very long time, if ever. They make a move and they improve one of their biggest weaknesses on the defensive side of the football. It really looked clear and cut that they were going to be Super Bowl contenders. And even I was thinking that the NFC winner was going to be either the Packers or the Rams or maybe the Eagles. But as the season went along, I was fairly more and more confident in the Rams and the Packers. But then the Packers, as the season went along, they were looking good, but they also lost some horrible games. And these games were against really bad opponents. If it was like Packers versus a great team, you know, like a team like a contender or a playoff team, the Packers were going to bring their A game. But if it was a bad team, these Packers would struggle, like against the Browns specifically. And I know the Carolina Panthers are a playoff team now, but when you lose against the Carolina Panthers, back when they weren't a playoff team, 16-13 at home, and Jordan Love throws one of the worst balls I've ever seen in my entire life, that should have been intercepted, but it was probably better that the guy dropped it because it was 4th down, so the Panthers were able to take over possession at the spot that they turned it over from. It was just a weird season. I know I overused that word weird a lot, but the Packers season just progressively got worse and worse as the season went along, and they started off really hot. And I remember another candidate for games of the year was that Dallas Cowboys versus Green Bay Packers game in Dallas, where it went into overtime and it ended up being a tie in one of the strangest outcomes imaginable. 40-40. I don't know if that was a scoregami or not. By the way, this is a pro scoregami podcast, by the way. I freaking love scoregamis. Anytime I see one, it's just like, that is so awesome. Like, I'm a numbers guy. I'm a nerd. At the end of the day, I love scoregamis. So seeing a scoregami, it just makes my day almost every single weekend. So I love that account. And anyways, Back to the Green Bay Packers. Jordan Love, I'm actually a big fan of Jordan Love. I think he's a top 10 quarterback. Does he make some stupid decisions? Yes. Does he make some amazing throws too? Absolutely. So it's weird. He's kind of got both Aaron Rodgers and Brett Favre in him at the same time. You know, he's He's like a big stupid pick guy. Courtesy of Pardon My Take, that was a nickname from them that I think they called Justin Herbert a big stupid pick guy. I'm not sure, but Jordan Love, he's like the definition of a big stupid pick guy, but he'll also torch your defense and drop, 350 and 4 tugs, So it's been a season to both remember and forget for the Green Bay Packers. On the offensive side of the ball, before they lost Tucker Kraft, they were looking like an absolute offensive juggernaut. Tucker Kraft, what an absolute weapon, and what an absolute devastating injury that Tucker Kraft suffered. And I hope he heals properly, and I hope he rehabs properly, because the league is much better when Tucker Kraft is dominating. But they have Dontavian Wicks, who's made a lot of growth. They have Romeo Doubs. They have Matthew Golden, which, they haven't really even utilized all that much this year, which has been incredibly weird considering he was the first round pick of a wide receiver that the Packers have ever selected, or have selected in like over 20 years or something like that. I can't remember the exact stat, but the fact that you spent such high draft capital on this kid and you don't even utilize him, it's definitely a questionable decision. On the defensive side of the ball, obviously you had Micah Parsons, and although the stats weren't eye-popping, if you actually looked and watched these games, you would see that he was either being triple teamed, or he was being chipped by the tight end, or chipped by the running back, and he was still making his force felt in the league and in those games, and he had a untouchable motor to him where he would just keep going and going and going. He never ran out of gas. If the quarterback would drop back to pass and he'd be rolling out and he'd be trying to extend the play, Micah Parsons would just be breathing down his neck, of course. And that all came down to a halt when they came to Denver, and Bo Nix juked this guy out of his shoes, out of his ACL. And I'm not trying to make a joke out of it, because that is a horrific injury, and I do feel sorry for Packers fans. That was a season-ending injury, not just for Micah Parsons, but probably for the Green Bay Packers as well. They limped into the playoffs, unfortunately, after that. They were never really the same, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Micah Parsons really changed that Packers defense for the better. So seeing that Packers defense missing Micah Parsons, even after giving him $47 million a year, even after giving 2 first-round picks to the Cowboys to get him, and seeing him not even finish the season, I'm happy that he got his money. This is a pro player podcast. We want the players to get money. We want the players to get as much money as possible and build their generational wealth for their families. And you only have a few years in the NFL, so I firmly believe, make as much as you can and get the hell out, and hopefully get the hell out safe and sound. But at the end of the day, that really sucks for the Packers organization to give that much capital, both in terms of cap space and draft picks, for a guy who couldn't even finish a season. That was horrific, and I truly do feel for you guys. I do apologize. It was a bad end to the season. Now, at the end of the day, you guys are not out of it. The Packers are not out of it. I still like their chances against the Bears this weekend. They always give the Bears fits, and a division rival, I think when it comes to division games and division rivalries, there's always a slight bump that the underdog has. And I actually don't know the odds. I don't know who the underdog and who the favorite is, but that one's got to be pretty close. Anyways, I'm getting off track. I'm going to give these guys a B- in terms of the NFC regular season, end of season grade. They got a B-. At the beginning of the season, they got an A+, and then it just got progressively worse and worse as the season went along. But they still made the playoffs. They still beat a lot of good teams. They lost to some bad teams. Coaching, I do want to talk about Matt LaFleur. I don't know if Matt LaFleur is a good coach or not, because there are times where I'm like, wow, what a devious scheme by Matt LaFleur, especially when Malik Willis comes in. When Malik Willis comes in, it's like, okay, we don't really know what to expect. We haven't seen this guy play a lot since those first couple of games last year after Jordan Love got hurt in the first game, and then, he had his time in Tennessee as well, but for the most part, we don't really know what to expect from Malik Willis, and Matt LaFleur turns Malik Willis into an absolute stud. So I believe, personally, he's a good coach, but at the end of the day, he also makes some bad decisions where I'm just, I leave myself questioning, wow, is he a good coach? I personally think so, but there are times where I really question it. And shout out my friend Dylan, my best friend Dylan. He's a Packers fan, and he's out on Matt LaFleur. So I am a bit more familiar with Packers lore than other people, especially people who don't live in Wisconsin, because I have the pleasure of being best friends with a Packers fan. But at the end of the day, it's really hard to judge whether or not Matt LaFleur is a good head coach or not. And I think I heard some rumblings, I heard some rumors that if they don't win this game against Chicago, then he might be on the hot seat. So we will see. At the time of this recording, Matt LaFleur still has a job. But if you're listening to this next week and he's fired, this might sound totally comical to you. Anyways, next up, we got the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions season is an F, an absolute F. And there's no other grade that you could possibly give them, especially after last year and seeing the success of last year and seeing the absolute heartbreak that they suffered in the playoffs last year. For them to come off of a 15-win season, the next season, not even finish top 2 in their division, not even make the playoffs. Granted, it is a hard division, and it is a hard conference to make the playoffs. But for you to win 15 games in the previous season, in heartbreaking fashion, lose your offensive coordinators and your defensive coordinator, and not even make the playoffs, it's totally unacceptable, especially with the amount of talent that you have on that team. Jared Goff is another quarterback that I like, and he's a part of that dying breed of quarterbacks that they're kind of like statues in the pocket. They don't really move around a lot. They don't extend the play a lot, but they are precision pocket passers at the end of the day. Wow, say that 5 times fast. They're precision pocket passers, and that is a dying breed in the NFL, and I really like watching him a lot. But this offense and the defense both struggled at the end of the day against a lot of these teams. Now, I know that they beat the Bears twice, which is hilarious considering the Bears' success this year. They beat the Bears twice, but they also lost to the Vikings twice. I don't know if that's just a matchup issue. You know, the first time you lose to the Vikings, that's fine. Although it was at home, so that was kind of dog shit. But pardon my language, that was pretty bad to lose against the Vikings at home. But at the end of the day, it's a Brian Flores-led team. The Vikings, we're going to get to them in a second. They are a good team. They have a lot of talent on both sides of the ball. They just have a huge question mark at quarterback right now, to say the very least. To lose to the Vikings first game, the first matchup of the season, I guess that's understandable. You know, it's a division game. That's understandable. When you play on Christmas and you're going up against the third string, Max Brosmer, and you're fighting for your playoff lives, and you know that the Packers, who you're trying to leapfrog, are playing in a tough matchup against the Baltimore Ravens, which they ended up losing that matchup, by the way. And we didn't even get to that part in the Packers part of this pod. But for you to lose on Christmas night against Max Brosmer, who had, I believe, 3 net passing yards, it's totally unacceptable. And it's a total F. I believe that the Lions finished 9-8, which is still a winning record. But at the end of the day, if you have Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams, Jahmyr Gibbs, who's a top 2, if not number 1 running back in the entire league, Sam Laporta, Isaac Tesla, David Montgomery, if you have all of these guys, man, Penei Sewell, you have all of these Pro Bowlers, all of these All-Pros on your team, and you still miss the playoffs, at the end of the day, I have no choice but to give you an F. And it's just completely unacceptable. And now I know Dan Campbell is going to get those guys right. I know that they're going to make the playoffs next year. I just can't for the life of me give this team anything other than an F. When they won 15 games last year, they were looking like Super Bowl favorites, and people were still picking them to make the Super Bowl this year, even though they had lost the offensive genius Ben Johnson to their division rival Bears, and then they lost Aaron Glenn to the New York Jets. The players are still there. The people on the field are still there. It's not like they magically forgot all the concepts overnight. And they were still putting up points. I believe they're still top 3 in offense in total points. But there was just a lot of games where, you know, they played too close to the Jameis Winston-led Giants. And I'm a big Jameis Winston guy. We're going to get to the Giants here in a second. I'm a big Jameis Winston guy. But at the end of the day, you know, you can't keep it close with the Jameis Winston-led Giants. You can't keep it close and actually lose to the Minnesota Vikings. And I know you guys are going to be talking about, oh, what about the Broncos? They keep it close. Yeah, but they win these games. They don't lose to the Minnesota Vikings with Max Brosmer. They don't lose to the Chiefs with Chris Oladokin. Shout out Chris Oladokin. But it's crazy. You can't have a season where you give everybody in Detroit hope for the first time in years and then follow it up by winning 15 games the next year and looking like absolute Super Bowl favorites, and then followed up the next year by not even making the playoffs. It's totally, totally, totally unacceptable. I know that they ended up winning their last game of the season against the Bears, and they ended on a high note, and I'm actually happy for them. I'm glad that they did it. And didn't really affect the Bears all too much at the end of the day either. The Eagles ended up losing to the Commanders, which we'll also get to here in a little bit. But it was a great way to play spoiler. But you don't want to be playing spoiler when you've established yourself in the NFL and you've established a winning culture, or at least I thought you established a winning culture, but you didn't. At the end of the day, you didn't, and you choked this season. At the end of the day, you just absolutely choked this season, and I hope you guys can come back stronger next year, but for right now, I have to give you guys an F. Next up, we got the Minnesota Vikings. All right, next up, we got the Minnesota Vikings. So the Minnesota Vikings, this one's a little bit tough to grade. I'm going to actually have to talk through this a little bit and see how I feel. I know which way I'm leaning for the Minnesota Vikings, but they had so much production on both sides of the ball with this team, and they have so much talent on this team. The only thing that they were missing was competent quarterback play. That word, by the way, competent, it kicks my butt all the time. That one, for some reason, when I'm in my flow state, when I'm talking and I say competent, it trips me up. This is take 2 right now, because I said it at first and I had to repeat it 5 times, competency, competent. But anyways, they were just missing some competent quarterback play away from being a serious contender in this league, which is crazy to say considering that they won 14 games last year. But it's not the same thing, because Sam Darnold, who they let go of for their for their first round pick, JJ McCarthy, which at the times felt like the right decision because you have to see what you got. But on the other hand, if you see a guy that comes in and wins 14 games for you, 14 games is hard to win in the league. I don't know how you let that guy walk away from you. And I know that hindsight is 20/20. But if a guy comes in and wins 14 games from you, puts up MVP level numbers, I believe it was 4,500 yards last year and 35 plus touchdowns, and he knows how to run your offense, maybe you just trade JJ McCarthy because nobody knows what JJ McCarthy is, and you can actually get some decent capital. There's a lot of teams in this league that need a quarterback, a lot of suckers in this league that would trade some decent capital for JJ McCarthy. But at the end of the day, like I said, hindsight is 20/20. These guys have so much talent on both sides of the ball. They got Jordan Mason. They got They got Justin Jefferson. They got Jalen Naylor, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson. They got a semi-decent O-line. I actually don't really want to say decent, but and then on the defensive side of the ball, they have some dogs on that defense. And not only that, but they were led by a dog, Mr. Brian Flores himself. The dog, the guy that told Tua straight up, your ass. And nobody believed him, but now we're all looking at him like a hero because he was the first one to be brave enough to say it. Mr. Brian Flores himself, what an absolute dog, was able to win games where his quarterback on the other side of the ball threw for 3 net passing yards in the section that I just talked about with the Detroit Lions. But Brian Flores, I believe he definitely deserves another head coaching job. I know he's a little tough on the players sometimes, but at the end of the day, he won, 8 games with the Dolphins after starting 1-7. He continuously leads defenses to finishing top 6, top 5 defenses in the league almost every single year after year. He loves the blitz, and this is a pro blitz podcast. The name of the podcast, Bring the Sink, that's in reference to the blitz. You got to bring the sink, man. And that's exactly what Brian Flores does. He brings the sink every single time. I love Brian Flores. I love Kevin O'Connell, KOC. I think he's an offensive mastermind. But at the end of the day, I think he was in a little too over his head when it came to JJ McCarthy, because there's only so much you can do as a miracle worker on the offensive side of the ball when your quarterback is performing just as well, if not worse, than Jamarcus Russell, one of the biggest busts in NFL history. Now, I know that J.J. McCarthy was struggling with injury throughout the year and came in and then came out and then came in. But at the end of the day, he's looking at some points of the league, or at some points during this season, he was looking like one of the worst quarterbacks ever in NFL history to be drafted in the first round. I know that he improved slightly towards the end, and he suffered a few injuries. He suffered a concussion or two, I believe. But there was also a time where they had Carson Wentz coming in, and Carson Wentz, I think he won a couple of games this year too. I know that he crushed the Cincinnati Bengals back when they were also dealing with some quarterback injuries, but Carson Wentz was keeping it close with the Eagles. I know that Eagles game, it came down to like the last 2 minutes, and the Eagles needed a first down desperately to end that game, which they eventually did. But that was also close. And, you know, if you can make Carson Wentz look like a competent quarterback, especially at his age right now. I liked Carson Wentz back in the day, back when 2016, 2017, back when he was balling for the Eagles. But after all those injuries and after he bounced from team to team to team, it was really tough to like Carson Wentz afterwards, especially hearing all the off the field stuff that he had going on. It was really tough to see the quarterback play from the Minnesota Vikings this year at the end of the day. And I'm leaning towards giving them a D+, because the defensive side of the ball was so much fun to watch. I'm a big defensive guy, so watching that defense perform week after week, it was awesome, and they were bringing the sink, no pun intended, and it was cool. But that offensive side of the ball, it made you want to rip your eyeballs out of their sockets. It was horrible. It was. And, you know, Justin Jefferson, anytime they panned the camera to him on the sidelines, he looked so depressed. And he's one of the best, if not the best, wide receiver in the entire league right now. And to see him depressed, it's like, do they run with J.J. McCarthy next year? I guess you have no choice, really, unless Joe Burrow requests a trade, or you can get somebody better. I know that Aaron Rodgers last year was interested in joining the Vikings. I know that he's probably going to stay with the Steelers or retire next year. But last year, if Aaron Rodgers was knocking on your door and you knew J.J. McCarthy was this bad, why don't you just sign Aaron Rodgers? And I say this as a guy who isn't the biggest Aaron Rodgers guy in the entire world. But Aaron Rodgers is definitely still better than 2 or 3 J.J. McCarthys combined. You know, and not only that, watching Max Brosmer play, I feel bad for this kid, man. This guy, I'm not gonna try to slander players too much. These guys are in the NFL for a reason. They're a lot better than the other 8 billion people that aren't playing quarterback on this earth. But Max Brosmer, especially that game against Seattle, where he just threw one of the most comedic, worst pick sixes I've ever seen in my entire life. To see him start multiple games, it was like, is there literally any other option? It was kind of like watching Deshaun Watson play for the Cleveland Browns before he tore his ACL. It was like, was there literally any other option? Like, are there any free agent quarterbacks out there? I know it was post the trade deadline, so they couldn't have traded for a guy, but there was no other option. You had to toss this poor guy out there that looked like a total mailman, just mailing these pick sixes to the Seattle Seahawks, and especially against that vicious Seahawks defense. It's like, at that point, if you know that this guy is just crapping his pants every single time he goes out there, especially against that formidable, almost best in the league, top 3 in the league defense in Seattle, why don't you just run the ball the entire time? I'm getting off track a little bit, as I usually do, but I believe the Vikings get a D+. I couldn't imagine a whole lot of expectations behind a guy who's making his first ever start in the league this year. You have to kind of be fair to him. But at the end of the day, you have an offensive mastermind at head coach, so you would expect to believe that you would get some sort of offensive production when it came from the guys that you traded up for in the draft, that you specifically wanted, and that you were worried that Sean Payton was going to trade up his Denver Bronco team to draft. And so you gave up capital to the New York Jets just to draft him. you would think that there was going to be some level of production. Like, obviously, there was something that you liked from him. There was something on the film or something from camp or something from the NFL Combine where you thought, oh, this is our guy. There was something that you saw that made you think, we're not going to give Sam Darnold $40 million. Let's roll it with this guy. And so you dug your own grave with J.J. McCarthy. Luckily, you only got him on contract for another couple more years, and then you have the option on the 5th year to pick it up or let him loose. But at the end of the day, you work with what you got, and at the end of the day, they won 9 games with almost no offensive production. And for that, especially in that tough division, one of the best divisions in the NFL, the NFC North, I gotta give you a D+. It's still passing. According to some institutions, it's still passing, but when you had the answer right there, right in front of you last year, and you rolled it with this guy, you rolled the dice with this guy, at the end of the day, you reap what you sow. And hopefully J.J. McCarthy can improve. I'm not a J.J. McCarthy. I know I just spent the last 10 minutes hating and ripping on J.J. McCarthy, but hopefully he can improve. Hopefully he can get better, and hopefully he can do this draft class some justice, because we got Drake May, Bo Nix, Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams, who have all been great, have all made the playoffs, and we have yet to see either Michael Penix or J.J. McCarthy take that next step like all the other guys have taken those strides. So, giving the Vikings a D+, just to be nice. I'm a lenient guy sometimes. And that concludes the NFC North. Next up, we got the NFC East. We're talking about the reigning Super Bowl champions, Philadelphia Eagles. All right, we're on to the Philadelphia Eagles, and this is another one that's tough to grade because coming off of that Super Bowl hangover, you never really know what to expect from the Philadelphia Eagles, but people, after that Super Bowl performance against the Kansas City Chiefs where they kicked in the teeth of the Kansas City Chiefs and made the Chiefs look like a team that we've never seen before, you had no choice but to expect them to run it back and to repeat, and they very well could still run it back and repeat. They're the 3rd seed right now. They still made the playoffs. They still won their division. But things looked very, very clunky throughout the year, both on and off the field. First, you had that A.J. Brown problem that's impossible to ignore. He was coming out almost every single week with either tweets or he'd hop on some sort of stream or podcast and he would come out and say, oh, this is a shit show. This is not, the offense is not working. And granted, I mean, he was right at some points. The offense was not working and he needs the ball more and they're winning these games and yet he's still mad. And one part of me kind of feels where he's coming from. I kind of understand where he's coming from because at the end of the day, he is a star wide receiver and he wants to make that money. He wants to make a legacy. He wants to make a name for himself. But at the end of the day, if you want to win Super Bowls, if you want to be a winner, you got to be a team player. And the funniest stat is it seemed like every single time that he got multiple touchdowns, when he got like 10 plus receptions for 120 yards and 2 touchdowns, it felt like they lost those games. And it was like, do you want to win or do you want to rack up your stats? If you wanted to rack up your stats, why don't you just stay in Tennessee? I know you got traded, but at the end of the day, you could easily just get traded. Some poor team will pick up that contract. They'll just toss you 15 balls a game. You'll win 6 games a year. And then you can coast into the Hall of Fame that way, especially since you already got your Super Bowl ring. But at the end of the day, it was just clunky on both sides of the ball. On both sides, actually, I'm being a little harsh. Now that I'm thinking about it, now that I'm saying it out loud, it was not clunky on both sides of the ball. It was only clunky on the offensive side of the ball. I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. The Eagles, defensively speaking, the Eagles were one of the best units in the entire league, and they have some absolute dogs on that team. They got Jalen Carter. Jordan Davis was looking like one of the best defensive linemen in the entire league. You have Cooper DeJean, you got Quinyon Mitchell, and they're both locking down both sides of that part of the field that they're covering. The defense was definitely not the problem for the Eagles this year. The defense, led by Vic Fangio, former Denver Broncos head coach, who I'm not sure he'll ever get a head coaching job again, led by Zach Bond. I personally love Zach Bond. I think he's one of the best linebackers in the league. I remember he was destined to become a free agent last year, and the Eagles immediately re-signed him, and I was like, man, I wanted the Broncos to get Zach Bond so bad. Zach Bond, definitely one of my favorite defensive players to watch this year and last year, and it's been interesting. On the defensive side of the ball, the Eagles have been extremely, extremely dominant. On the offensive side of the ball, it's been absolutely horrific. You got Jalen Hurts, which might be one of the most inconsistent quarterbacks in the entire NFL, because not only does he play inconsistently, it's just the range of the inconsistency is crazy too when it comes to his stats. He could either pass for 90 yards and go like 11 for 19 for 90 yards and maybe a touchdown, and he'll run for a touchdown or something, or he'll pass for like 375 yards and 4 touchdowns. And you're like, what's going on? What's the problem here? And I know that the play calling has not been great with Kevin Patullo, and I know everybody in Philly has something to say about Kevin Patullo. But at the end of the day, you guys are professionals. You guys know how to run an offense. You got Saquon Barkley back there. The guy rushed for 2,000 yards last year. You have one of the best, on paper, offensive lines in the entire league, which I understand has been decimated by some injuries here and there. But at the end of the day, those big, tough dudes are still those corn-fed boys that you had from last year, with the exception of Lane Johnson. And Lane Johnson, I will say, definitely makes a big difference for that Philadelphia team. But, you got A.J. Brown, you got Devontae Smith, you got Dallas Goedert, you got Saquon. You even traded for Tank Bigsby, who, surprisingly, every time he gets the ball this year, it seems like he's been like a nice breath of fresh air for that Eagles team. But you got all these guys, and allegedly, you got Jalen Hurts, who Eagles fans have been screaming to me that he's top 5 for the last couple of years. But every time I watch him, I'm like, I don't really see what's top 5 about him. He's definitely top 5 when it comes to running the football. And don't even get me started on the tush push. We're not discussing the tush push on this podcast, by the way. I despise that play. We're not talking about it. At running the football and extending the play, he's amazing. But when it comes to decision making, when it comes to making his reads, he's not the greatest quarterback. He's fairly accurate at the end of the day, especially for an Alabama quarterback. But it's hard to evaluate this team when they're just so gosh darn inconsistent. They lost against the Broncos. That's a formidable loss. I understand that. The Broncos are one of the best teams in the league. Can't judge you there. They lost against the Giants. They got absolutely destroyed by the Giants. And I was like, what was going on here? When I was watching that Thursday night game, the Eagles just did not look like an NFL team that day. And then, not to mention, the Eagles play some of the most boring football that I think I've ever watched in my entire life, and that's pretty rich coming from me, considering that I'm a Broncos fan and that a lot of the Broncos games this year were kind of boring to watch and very defensive. But there's defensive games where they're really fun to watch. There's lots of sacks, there's turnovers, there's guys just getting absolutely stuffed for 1-yard gains, or you can't even pass it to the flat without them getting open field tackles. And then there's just the suffocating kind of defenses where there's not a whole lot going on and it's just punt, 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 punt. And I feel like that's been a lot of the Eagles games this year. And not only that, I feel like the Eagles have also been benefited a lot by the whistle. I'm not a big refs guy. I'm not a big blame the refs guy when it comes to sports, and especially the NFL in general. But the Eagles got a lot of favorable calls this year, and it was kind of interesting considering that they just won a Super Bowl last year. So the NFL might play favorites, and it was some egregious calls. I remember there was that. It was either a Sunday night or a Monday night game, Eagles versus Lions, where the Lions, they were down by 3. They needed to make a stop on 3rd down, and they tossed it to A.J. Brown, and A.J. Brown caught it for a 1st down, and then they threw a flag. Or no, I think it was an incomplete pass, and they threw a flag, and it's like, oh, this is definitely offensive pass interference. And you look at the replay, and A.J. Brown pushed off in the most obvious manner, and they called it defensive pass interference on the Lions. And I was like, wow, that was to end the game. How could you end a game like that? That's absolute insanity. Not that the Lions offense would have done anything, but you got to give them a chance at the end of the day. And then there was that game against the Giants where we're talking about that forbidden play, the tush push, where I can't remember who it was, but one of the Giants players, he came around the side and he ripped it from Jalen Hurts, and they called it forward progress. What do you mean forward progress? The guy was still going. He was still moving forward. So, I don't know. It's been tough to judge the Eagles season this year. very clunky on offense, very suffocating on defense. At the end of the day, I can't judge a team just because they're boring to watch as long as they win football games. If you're boring to watch and you don't win, then get this product out of my face. But if you're boring to watch and you win, I have no choice but to respect it. Considering that they're coming off of a Super Bowl hangover, there's a lot of issues both on and off the field. You have an offensive coordinator whose house gets egged in Philadelphia, which is crazy. Please don't egg people's houses, guys. Come on, let's use some common sense. I guess I got to give them an A-. They won their division. Granted, it was a pretty easy division to win, but they won their division. They beat a lot of good teams. Their schedule this year, if you look at the Philadelphia Eagles' schedule this year, it was an absolute gauntlet. You know, they played the Cowboys twice, and the Cowboys were one of the best offensive teams in the league. Granted, the Cowboys' defense wasn't that great, and we're going to get to the Cowboys here in just a moment, but they beat the Cowboys, they beat the Chiefs, who also not the same team, but they also beat the Lions, they beat the Packers, they lost a close game against the Broncos, they beat the Bills. Don't even get me started on that game. The Bills definitely should have won that game, but coulda, woulda, shoulda at the end of the day. Definitely a tough game for Josh Allen, tough game for the Bills kicker to miss that extra point initially. And also, okay, I do want to have something to say. You can't tell me that Jalen Hurts is a top 5 quarterback when during that Bills game, especially in the second half, Jalen Hurts did not complete a single pass. How do you not complete a single pass in a whole half of a football game and expect me to deem you top 5 in the league? That is absolutely outrageous, ludicrous, absolute disrespectful to the other quarterbacks in the league. I don't think Jalen Hurts is a bad quarterback by any means, by any stretch of the imagination. And I know I'm kind of rambling on here, but at the end of the day, I'm not saying he's a bottom 5 quarterback, but I'm not saying he's a top 5 quarterback either. Anyways, for my grade for the Philadelphia Eagles season, I'm giving them a B+. You had a lot of issues both on and off the field, but you still won your division. You're still going into the playoffs. A lot of people are still picking you to go to the Super Bowl. You have a great defense, a top 5 unit. If you get some sort of production from your offensive side of the ball, I definitely think you guys could make the Super Bowl. So that's why you guys are getting a B+. I'm actually kind of leaning towards A- range. Maybe I'll give the Eagles A-. I'll be nice. I've been ripping on the Eagles a little too much right now, but I'll give the Eagles A-. Next up, we got the Dallas Cowboys. All right, on to the Dallas Cowboys. The Dallas Cowboys offensively had one of the best seasons an offense has ever had. They had Dak Prescott throwing for over 4,500 yards. They had Javonte Williams rushing for over 1,200 yards. And then they had George Pickens, 1,400 receiving yards. If you look at these at first glance and you didn't even watch football, or you didn't even watch football from this year, you would think, wow, these guys are probably the 1 seed, the 2 seed in the NFC. Maybe they have a first round bye. Maybe they're Super Bowl contenders. But on the defensive side of the ball, they were 30th in the league. They were one of the worst defensive units ever when it came to the defensive side of the football. And it was horrible watching how bad this Dallas Cowboys team was on the defensive side of the football, and they have nobody to blame but themselves. Now, at the end of the day, I know a lot of people blame Jerry Jones for trading away Micah Parsons, and Jerry Jones 100% deserves all of the blame, don't get me wrong, but it's not like Micah Parsons would have changed that defense into a, top 15, top 10 unit. They would have been a lot better. They definitely would have given up a lot less points and a lot less yards and would have gotten a lot more sacks. Micah Parsons is not going to change a 30th ranked defense into a top 5 defense. Micah Parsons might take you back to a 15th ranked defense, which would have definitely made them playoff contenders, if not Super Bowl contenders. But Jerry Jones and Micah Parsons' agent just couldn't get along, and it was an unfortunate way to start the season. But Dak Prescott, I was incredibly impressed from Dak Prescott this year. I've never been a hater of Dak Prescott, but I've never really been a Dak Prescott fan. But seeing him coming into this year, he was extremely confident. It was the most confident that I've ever seen Dak play in his entire career coming out of Mississippi State. It was like a completely different player. I really liked watching Dak Prescott play this year. He led one of the best offenses in the entire NFL. In terms of yardages, it's actually ranked second in the NFL. And it was quite fun to watch almost every single Cowboys game because you knew it was going to be high scoring, because you knew if the Cowboys had any sort of shot of winning the game, they had to put up a lot of points. So the Cowboys were kind of must-watch TV this season, and as well as the fact that they beefed up their defense towards the trade deadline. They traded for Logan Wilson, and they traded for Quinnen Williams, and Quinnen Williams is one of my favorite defensive linemen in the entire NFL. So to see that he made an immediate impact was no surprise to me, but it was just quite unfortunate that the Dallas Cowboys could not win enough games to get into the playoffs, because this was such a fun team to watch. It was almost kind of like the Bears. The Bears were also a lot of fun to watch too, because their defense wasn't really all that great, but they were putting up some points. So you already know that those games are always going to be fun to watch no matter what. Their highlight of the season had to be against the Kansas City Chiefs on Thanksgiving. I remember exactly where I was when I was watching that game too. It was especially as a Kansas City Chiefs hater, it was a sight to watch. I really loved watching the Cowboys consecutively beat the Eagles and then the next week beat the Chiefs to make us think, oh wow, maybe they're gonna make a run. Maybe they're gonna snag that last wild card spot. Maybe they'll even leapfrog the Eagles for the division. But then they ended up losing towards the end, and they lost some very winnable games, and I can't remember exactly which game they lost that really knocked them out of playoff contention, or at least let the air out of the balloon, and it was kind of sad to see. But I know they lost against the Chargers, and they lost against the Cardinals. That one was the real devastating one. If they didn't lose to the Cardinals, I think that the season might have gone a little differently for the Dallas Cowboys. They tied against the Packers in a game that I just talked about on the Packers portion of the podcast, one of the best games of the year, one of the contenders for game of the year. It was such an interesting season. And at the end of the day, Brian Schottenheimer, the questionable decision to hire him at head coach this year, actually turned out to be a pretty good decision by Jerry Jones. It did not seem like he was in over his head at all. The offense was rolling. The offense, like I said, one of the best in the league. It was incredible to see the Cowboys offense this year, and that you got to give a lot of credit to Brian Schottenheimer for that. So I like Brian Schottenheimer a lot. I think that was the right decision. The wrong decisions that they made were primarily on the defensive side of the football. They primarily made a mistake when it came to their defensive coordinator. They hired Matt Eberflus, who actually just got let go of this week, in a decision that I totally wholeheartedly agree with. I don't know what they saw from Matt Eberflus pretty much at all over his tenure in Chicago for Jerry Jones to think that he was going to be a formidable defensive coordinator. But the fact that you traded away your best player and you hired a questionable hire at defensive coordinator, maybe, who knows, maybe they're going to get Brian Flores and it's going to be a lot different of a team next year. And trust me, if they do get Brian Flores as defensive coordinator, if Brian Flores doesn't become a head coach next year, I watch out for this Cowboys team. Watch out, because that offense, there is very little, if any, weaknesses on that side of the football. Special teams, they have a dangerous returner in Kevontae Turpin. If the Dallas Cowboys get a top 15 defense, watch out. These guys are definitely going to be Super Bowl contenders, especially if they get some more talent on that side of the football. So, with all that being said, it's kind of hard to give them a grade, because there wasn't a whole lot of expectations, especially after they traded away Micah Parsons. But I guess trading away Micah Parsons is also a part of this grade, because it happened near the start of the season. So I'll give the Cowboys a solid C. Not a C+, not a C-. I'll give them a C. They were a lot of fun to watch this year. They had a great offense, abysmal defense. At the end of the day, I have no choice. I can't really give them an A. They didn't make the playoffs. They didn't win their division. They didn't come close to winning their division. But I don't think the season was a total failure. Dak Prescott had one of his best seasons as a pro, and he's looked extremely confident, and I hope he can roll that into next year. You got to see your backup, Joe Milton, and there was some things that you saw from him that you didn't like. There was some things that you saw from him that you did like. So all in all, I got to give them a C. A+ on the offensive side of the football, and F on the defensive side of the football. Let's just meet in the middle. Next up, we got the Washington Commanders. All right, the Washington Commanders. Now this one is pretty easy to grade. I think this one's just an F. They had a cute story last year, and it was actually pretty awesome to watch them play last year. They had a rookie quarterback. They had Jaden Daniels, who was tearing it up. He won 12 games. He took them to the NFC Championship game. The expectations were pretty much the sky is the limit for this team. They drafted some nice talent. They brought in Bill Krosky Merritt, and everybody thought that he was going to be the fantasy steal of the decade. They brought in Deebo Samuel, and a lot of people had comments and concerns about Deebo Samuel, but he actually performed pretty well this year, all things considered. The main complaint that I have about the Washington Commanders, besides the unfortunate injuries that they suffered on both sides of the football, is that they just don't have any talent whatsoever on the defensive side of the football. They have Mike Sainristil, who led the team in interceptions. He had 4 interceptions this year. And if Mike Sainristil is your CB1 and Bobby Wagner is your leading tackler, mind you, 87-year-old Bobby Wagner, your team is just going to get torched on a weekly basis, and that's pretty much what we saw from this team. They won some good games this year. I know that they beat the Chargers, and then they won a couple other games where you thought, wow, this team hasn't quit. But they also finished 5-12. And when you finish 5-12, after going 12-5, it was pretty much a mirror season, and you make it to the NFC Championship, and your star quarterback gets injured 18 times to the point where his elbow is bending in the wrong direction in a game where he shouldn't have even been playing in, because at that point in time they were already losing 38-7 with a few minutes left in the fourth quarter. Pretty much all hell broke loose. This was definitely a season from hell for the Washington Commanders. I'm glad that they kept Dan Quinn, because I do believe that Dan Quinn is a good head coach, and I'm still questioning the decision to let go of Cliff Kingsbury, because Kingsbury, he's one of those young guys who can develop a pretty good scheme, but also Kingsbury, I don't know what it is, but it seems like every single year, towards the end of the year, his offense becomes stale and pretty easy to predict. So you had some decent production from Marcus Mariota, the backup quarterback, who's probably one of the best backup quarterbacks that you can have in the National Football League right now. And he put up some decent numbers, and he kept it close with a lot of teams. Well, it was also a formidable tank at the end of the day, too. You lost a lot of games. You got to see a lot of players perform for next year. You were pretty much eliminated from the playoffs with like 8 games to go. That's an exaggeration, but there wasn't a whole lot to see from this Commanders season, especially after those Jaden Daniels injuries. And it was pretty much like this entire season was pretty much a preseason for next year, kind of evaluating the talent, evaluating your lack of talent, seeing who stays and seeing who goes. Don't really have much to talk about regarding this team. It was definitely an F. This season should have gotten a lot better, and we were all fearing for the sophomore slump of Jaden Daniels, but his quote-unquote sophomore slump wasn't even his fault, because he got injured so many different ways and so many different times. You had some good production from your running backs, like I said, Bill Krosky Merritt, Chris Rodriguez. Once Terry got paid, he kind of disappeared due to injury again, and that's totally fine. I don't hold injuries against players. Deebo, you got some decent production with. But once Terry came back, that offense definitely looked a lot more improved. Terry McLaurin is one of the best wide receivers in the league, and he really showed it. He was one of the few pass catchers to actually catch a touchdown against Pat Surtain this year, reigning Defensive Player of the Year. So anytime you can catch a touchdown against Pat Surtain, you pretty much earn the respect of a lot of people around the league. Like I said, there's not really much to talk about regarding this team. So at the end of the day, this is an F, and we're on to the New York Giants. All right, so we're on to the New York Giants, and anytime I hear New York Giants, I always think of that old Madagascar quote from King Julian, "All hail the New York Giants." Anyways, on to the New York Giants, we got an interesting season to evaluate. Hit it out of the park with their draft pick, Jackson Dart. Now, the only problem with Jackson Dart is that he was in the concussion tent probably like 87 times this year. Total exaggeration, total hyperbole, but he was checked out and he was evaluated for concussion a lot. He was kind of, him and Scatabo were kind of those creatine bros that were just leading with their head and, you know, just being total meatheads, which I absolutely adore. I think that was awesome energy, and, you know, seeing him prance around the field and making plays, and he was kind of like a rookie Baker Mayfield almost. He brought a spark to this team that didn't really have a lot of expectations. They went into the season with Russell Wilson, which good luck whenever you got Russell Wilson at the helm. But as soon as Jackson Dart seemed ready to start, he came in, I think week 3. No, I think he came in week 4 or week 5. Made his first ever start, and he was a lot of fun to watch. He really lit the league on fire. the first few games that he started. He even came close to beating my Denver Broncos. If we didn't have one of the most legendary comebacks of all time, the Jackson Dart could have shocked the world and beat the championship contender Denver Broncos. So in Denver, by the way, not to mention in Denver. So Jackson Dart, if you're a Giants fan, you're extremely grateful that you hit on this draft pick, on this draft prospect, Jackson Dart. I think he's going to be a lot better next year. I think he's going to improve. I think he's going to start sliding. I think he's going to start taking care of himself. And it was a fun year for Jackson Dart when he was playing. And it was also kind of fun to watch the Giants when they had Jameis Winston. I love Jameis Winston. Anytime you got to watch Jameis Winston, whether he's on your team or he's not, he just must watch television. I personally despised watching Russell Wilson this year start those 2 or 3 games that he started for the Giants. Although that Giants-Cowboys game that he started in week 2, where he threw for like 475 yards and they took him in overtime and the Cowboys ended up beating them 40-37, that was probably one of the best games Russell Wilson has ever had in his entire career. So I got to give credit where credit is due. But that didn't happen every single week. And obviously the next week when they played against Kansas City, that was the game that really was the nail in the coffin. After throwing the ball away on 4th down and getting an intentional grounding earlier in the play in the red zone when you're trying to make the comeback against Kansas City Chiefs. It was just totally unacceptable, and I totally understand why Brian Daboll put in Jackson Dart right after that game, and it ended up almost saving his job. Now, Brian Daboll, unfortunately, I do believe that he's a good offensive mastermind. I did think that he was a good coach. I mean, he took Daniel Jones in that unit to the playoffs and even won a playoff game beating the Minnesota Vikings, I believe in Minnesota if I'm not mistaken. So I do believe that Brian Daboll has a lot of talent and he has a mind for the game, but it just wasn't a good fit at the end of the day. It wasn't something that was sustainable, and I believe in my mind that they shouldn't have fired just Daboll. I understand why they did it, but if you're going to fire Daboll, you got to fire Joe Schoen too. Joe Schoen, although he did have a good draft class this year, Joe Schoen has ruined this team from the inside out and made the New York Giants one of the laughingstocks of the National Football League. So if you're going to fire Daboll, you got to fire the GM too. You can't hire a head coach who's just going to immediately come in and have his hands handcuffed because of a GM like Joe Schoen. Now, does that mean it's over for Joe Schoen? Does that mean he'll never improve? And does that mean he'll never become a good GM? Yeah, I mean, he's a young guy. Maybe they see something in him. Maybe he'll become a great GM and he'll start making great moves, you know? But right now, from what we've seen from Joe Schoen, I don't have any faith. I don't believe it. Now, the bright spots, I did talk about Jackson Dart. You gotta give love to Cam Scatterbo in those few games that he was playing before his devastating injury. I hope he can come back next year and perform just as well, if not better, than he was playing this year, because he was really lighting the league up. Him and Jackson Dart, I call them the creatine bros. Those guys were awesome to watch. Another guy that was awesome to watch was their wide receiver, Wan'Dale Robinson. Now, if you had Wan'Dale Robinson on fantasy this year, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you had to face Wan'Dale Robinson this year in fantasy, I am sorry, because you probably lost. This guy was getting anywhere between 18 to 30 points every single game. And, you know, you're looking, it's like a New York Giants wide receiver. Why would I draft him? Why would I sign him off the waivers? Nah, this guy was awesome. And this guy was putting up points. I'm pretty sure he tied the record for shortest receiver to ever hit a 1,000-yard receiving season. So that was awesome. You have these pieces that you can build around. You still got Tyrone Tracy. You got some good pieces. You have one of the best offensive linemen in the entire league, Andrew Thomas, who was completely shutting down players left and right, pass rushers, and it could have been anybody. Any elite pass rushers came, and Andrew Thomas would shut them down. He was an all-pro this year, and it was completely awesome to see that they had that level of production from their O-line, especially on the left tackle side of the ball. On the defensive side of the ball, their D-line, I gotta tell you, their D-line's pretty scary. They got Sexy Dexter Lawrence. They have Brian Burns. They got Abdul Carter, which had a pretty underwhelming rookie season, to say the least. I know there was some off the field issues here and there, a lot of rumors. We don't know what's true and what's not. I think there was a game or two where he was a healthy scratch, but when he did play, he was able to get pressure on the quarterback. He was able to make his presence felt. That D-line was actually pretty fun to watch this year, even though their record didn't really show it. There's a lot of pieces that you can build around this team, and depending on who they hire at head coach, I think this Giants team could be very dangerous. So, with all that being said, there was a lot of games that they ended up losing that they could have won, and I'm thinking specifically back to that Broncos game that I mentioned earlier. I think I got to give them a C-. They didn't really have a whole lot of expectations coming into the season, and they had Russell Wilson at the helm, but you saw a lot of things that you wanted to see from a lot of young players. And you had a lot of strong performances, especially from like that linebacker. I believe his name is Bobby Okereke, if I'm pronouncing that right. But you also went 4-13, and you weren't even close to making the playoffs. And you were one of like the first teams to even be eliminated from playoff contention. So I'll be nice. I'll give him a C-. You hit on a rookie quarterback, which is really hard to do. You hit on a rookie running back in the second round or third round. I can't remember when Scat was taken, but that was an awesome pick. You have a great defensive unit. You have pieces on the O-line. You got your coach fired. Hopefully there's a new regime change. Hopefully there's a coach out there that can bring this team to the promised land. So that's why I'm going to give them a C-. I don't think the season was a total failure because I don't believe that there was any expectation of even sniffing the playoffs this year. And that concludes the NFC East. Now we're going off to the NFC South. Starting off with the Carolina Panthers. All right, so we're on to the Carolina Panthers, and right off of the bat, I just got to give them an A+. They rebuilt their entire team from the ground up. They were one of the worst teams in the entire league over the last few years, and when they hired Dave Canales, a lot of people were skeptical. That's another word that kicks my butt. But a lot of people were skeptical over the hiring of Dave Canales, and he came in and he really changed the program. Now, he didn't change it overnight. They were still pretty bad last year, but they won a few more games than the year before. And then they came in this year off of a strong draft class and off of a strong free agency, signing Rico Dowdle, which was one of the free agency pickups of the century. Rico Dowdle coming in, not even being a starter those first few games and still rushing for over 1,000 yards. Incredibly impressive. He was a dog in fantasy for those few weeks that Chuba Hubbard was injured. They hit on their first-round draft pick in Tedero McMillan, T-Mac. First year in the league as a rookie, he eclipses 1,000 yards. You got Bryce Young, who did not look like an NFL quarterback his first couple of years in the league, and you kind of felt bad for the guy, too, because you know that at the end of the day, he's a nice guy, and you want him to succeed, especially when you saw such early success from C.J. Stroud, the guy that was picked right after him, and that he was benched for Andy Dalton. And then Andy Dalton came in and won a game or two. You really felt bad for Bryce Young. But this year, Bryce Young, he actually played like a pretty competent quarterback. He tossed for 23 touchdowns. He tossed for over 3,000 passing yards. And I know it's not eye-popping stats, but he made some great throws when he really didn't make those throws. When he really needed to, I should say. I'm thinking specifically back to that Rams-Panthers game where everybody and their mothers was picking the Rams. And he came in, fourth down, game on the line, and he tosses an absolute pill to his receiver for not only the first down, but for a touchdown. And then the Carolina defense cleans it up afterwards and ends the game. And the Panthers pull off one of the craziest upsets that we've seen this year in the NFL. They got some solid pieces. They got J.C. Horn, who I know was kind of eclipsed by Pat Surtain the first few years because they came out of the same draft class, and Pat Surtain was obviously drafted behind him. But J.C. Horn has really come into his own, and he's become a formidable shutdown corner. The linebacker who led in tackles, Christian Roseboom. First of all, an awesome name, by the way. If you ask me on the street what position Christian Roseboom plays, I'd be like, I hope he plays either linebacker or fullback because he brings the boom, that's pretty awesome. Don't sue me, Costco guys. Anyways, so the fact that this rebuild took so quickly for them to be at the bottom of the bottom, eating absolute sewage, and then to come up to the playoffs and make the playoffs and win the division, I have no choice but to give you an A+. Even though you won the division with an 8-9 record, you still won the division. And what do we say when people criticize you even though you win the division, you make the playoffs, you can kiss my ass. So that's why Panthers deserve an A+. It's been a lot of fun to watch. I'm looking forward to this playoff game. They're playing against the Rams again, and the Rams are looking for revenge. I think I'm going to have to lean towards the Rams. We'll talk about the Rams here in a second, but I think I have to lean towards the Rams winning that game. But anything can happen. It's any given Sunday, or in this case, any given Saturday. And it wouldn't surprise me if the Panthers won it again. But I'm so glad that this team made the playoffs. It's been an absolute joy to watch, and they're in a good position for years and years to come. And that's all thanks to Dave Canales and all of the pieces from these free agency and draft classes that they've really been hitting it out of the park on. So the next up we got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. All right, so we're on to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I was leaning towards giving y'all an A-. No, sorry, not an A. Whoa, definitely not an A-. I was leaning towards giving the Tampa Bay Bucks a D-, but with the recent news that they are rolling and running it back with Todd Bowles, this season was a total and complete failure. Now, the reason why I was leaning towards a D- was they were, in fact, decimated by injuries. Baker Mayfield did get injured and was playing injured for majority of the season. Those first 5 games where he was looking like an MVP candidate, it was awesome to watch, and the Bucs were the team to beat. But after that, when they played, especially once they played against the Rams, and Baker pretty much threw out his entire throwing shoulder trying to throw that Hail Mary, ever since that game, the season has been absolute kaput, and it's quite unfortunate because they have a lot of talent on this team. Like I said, it was also decimated by injuries. They had Bucky Irving that was injured, and Mike Evans who was injured, and this was the first year in Mike Evans' entire career that he didn't eclipse 1,000 yards, and Chris Godwin was coming back from injury, and he was slowly but surely making his way back. But there's just too much talent on this side of the ball, or on both sides of the ball, I should say, for you to miss the playoffs in one of the weakest divisions in the entire NFL. When you miss the playoffs to a team that won the division with a winning record, and then you don't even fire your head coach, who's gone 2 games above 500 in the last 4 seasons, not including the playoffs. It's crazy. How do you not fire him? Especially when he came in right after you guys had just won a Super Bowl. This is a Super Bowl winning team. This is a Super Bowl winning roster. It's a winning culture. And you have a lot of guys, some hungry guys that are hungry to win, hungry to make the playoffs, hungry to do something in the playoffs, to do some damage. And you have a head coach in Todd Bowles who just completely holds you back and ties your hands behind your back. It was extremely sad to see. As just a football fan, I'm not even a Tampa Bay Bucs fan like that, but it was just extremely sad to see as a football fan that you're running it back with Todd Bowles, especially considering the fact that you see Liam Cohen, your former offensive coordinator, who's having the time of his life in Jacksonville. Now, I understand hindsight is 2020, like I said before, but if hindsight is 2020, and you let that man walk out the door, I know that there was some controversy in the way that he did walk out the door, but when he produces Baker Mayfield's strongest statistical season of his entire career, maybe there's something to that, and there's a reason that you should have promoted him instead of Todd Bowles. Now, I don't think anybody was even thinking about that or in their right minds thinking about that during the time, but seeing now that Liam Cohen has done his own project and turned that Jags team around, imagine what he could have done with this Tampa Bay Bucs team. This team gets a total F, and they will continue to get an F unless Todd Bowles can figure out how to coach an actual defense, which is supposedly his specialty, by the way. I don't understand. You know, you're a defensive mastermind, and yet you got one of the weakest defenses in the league. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Now, the highlights of this Bucs team, especially those first 5 weeks of the season, they were considerably high for highlights. It was a lot of fun to watch. This team was definitely one of the best teams in terms of entertainment factor those first 5 or 6 games of the year. And the fact that they had Emeka Egbuka, one of the strongest wide receivers coming out of that 2025 NFL draft class, and he came in and he lit it up for the first few weeks of the season. He kind of dropped off, but at the end of the day, you got Baker Mayfield, who's injured. I don't really blame Emeka. He's still a rookie. Next year he'll get better, hopefully, and better, and we'll see a good sustained career from Ibuka, but you got all of these guys and you miss the playoffs in one of the weakest divisions. Like I said, it's completely unacceptable, and you have to get an F for that. So the next up, we're going to talk about one of my favorite teams to watch towards the end of the season, the New Orleans Saints. Okay, so hand up, my mistake. We're not actually going to talk about the Saints right now. We'll get to them here in a few minutes. We're going to talk about the Atlanta Falcons. For some reason, I had a total and complete brain fart, and I totally forgot about the Atlanta Falcons. But the Atlanta Falcons did finish third in that division in a three-way tiebreaker, which one of the wackiest, weirdest endings to a season that I could remember in my entire life. All three teams finishing 8-9, and you got two teams that played for their playoff chances on Saturday, and then the wrong outcome happened to the point where they had to root for another division rival the next day in a game that meant nothing for the actual teams that were playing in that game, but meant everything for the teams that were spectating in that division. That was it was just ludicrous. It was hilarious. But the Atlanta Falcons, wow, what a season that the Atlanta Falcons had. They beat some great teams this year, and they kept it close with some great teams too. They lost to the Patriots 24-23 in New England off of a missed extra point. They beat the Buffalo Bills, I believe, on Monday Night Football. They beat the Bucks after being down by 14 or 13 in Tampa. They beat, and these are all primetime, by the way, except for that Patriots game. They beat the Rams towards the end of the season when the Rams were still fighting for the division. Actually, I don't know if the Rams were still fighting for the division at the time, but the Rams they still had a lot to play for, and they beat the Rams. But then they also lost against the Jets, and it was weird because the Jets were trying to tank. The Jets were actively trying to tank. They were actively trying to lose games, and they traded away their stars, and somehow the Atlanta Falcons still lost to them, and we still don't really know if Michael Penix is the guy or not. And you're paying Kirk Cousins all of this money to be a backup, and then he comes in, he actually plays well. So now there's even more question marks. You're like, do you roll with Cousins, or do you see what you got with Penix? And Penix throws a beautiful ball, especially as a lefty. Lefties don't usually throw beautiful balls, but Penix, man, like that guy, he throws some absolute lasers. It's unfortunate that he is somewhat injury prone, because he was actually one of my favorite quarterbacks coming out of that 2024 draft class, and we still don't really know if he's going to be that guy or not, or if he can be developed into that guy or not. So we will see. He was a lot of fun to watch. They lost a lot of close games this year. I remember they lost to that Tampa Bay Bucks team in week 1 off of a Younghoe Koo missed field goal at the last possible second. They lost a lot of winnable games. They won a lot of games that they should have lost. It was one of the, I wouldn't even say it was a season from hell. It was like a season from purgatory. They ended 8-9, and as soon as they were eliminated from the playoffs with like 4 or 5 weeks to go, that's when they went on this run. And news came out a few days ago that they fired. Actually, it came out on the same Sunday that they ended up beating the Saints on the last week of the season. They came out and they said that they were firing Terry Fontenot and Raheem Morris, the head coach. So do I think that was the right decision? On both parts, absolutely, I do believe so. I don't believe that you should have drafted Michael Penix if you give Kirk Cousins $180 million. And even if you wanted some sort of an insurance plan, you don't use your top 10 overall pick on a quarterback when you're paying your starter $180 million. So it was all kind of doomed from the start. I don't know what they're going to do next year with Kirk or Penix. We'll see. But in terms of talent, this team has a lot of talent on both sides of the football, and they're extremely fun to watch. This Falcons team is, for the most part, when they show up, they are must-watch television, except when they're playing the Jets. I mean, they got, on the defensive side of the ball, they got Xavier Watts, they got Caden Ellis, they got these dogs, and the corner, the name is escaping me right now, but they have a shutdown corner on that side. And then, not to mention, on the offensive side of the football, they have one of the best receivers in the league in Drake London. They have a running back who's top one, top two running back in the league with Bijan. And not only that, his backup would probably start on 20 other teams, Tyler Algier. And that two-headed attack with Tyler Algier and Bijan has been absolutely awesome to watch, and it's awesome to see these teams going back to the roots of football and running the football and designing these outside zone runs, these inside zone runs, and getting their stars in open space. And if you were a Bijan Robinson fantasy owner, you were definitely happy this year, because this year he was one of the best in the league at his position. And then not only that, but you had great production from Kyle Pitts this year. He had, I believe, 5 touchdowns this year, and he finished as like one of the best tight ends in the league in terms of most major statistical categories. So you have decent guys on both sides of the ball. What you really need is a pass rush, and they tried to focus on that in the draft, and it somewhat helped. But if they had a dominant pass rush, I think this team, whether it's with Penix or Kirk Cousins, I believe this team could be a Super Bowl contender if they filled in that weakness. Now, I do know that Kyle Pitts is a free agent coming into this year, so I don't know if they're going to bring him back or not. Kind of depends on the price tag and how much money he wants and how much money they want to pay him. But this team was kind of hard to evaluate, and obviously anytime you lose your starting quarterback for the rest of the season, there's going to be times where the entire team kind of quits on the season and they can't wait to get to Cancun. And it was a good thing that they didn't show a lot of quit this year, and they finished the season strong. And going into next year, I hope they can carry that momentum to continue to win these games, and maybe they'll get the right head coach. And honestly, I'm trying to think about it right now. I don't even know if they would benefit from a offensive head coach or a defensive head coach. I don't know which head coach that they would benefit more from, but I think either way, they would have a much, much better season if they make the right decision at head coach. So with all that being said, the final grade that I'm going to give the Atlanta Falcons for their 2025 regular season is a C+. They didn't win the division, but they showed a lot of talent on both sides of the ball, a lot of building blocks. They're starting from scratch. They fired their GM. They fired their coach. This is a good ball of momentum that is rolling into the 2026 season. All right. Now we can discuss the New Orleans Saints. Anyways, so the New Orleans Saints going into this year, it was some real bad vibes, man. They hired Kellen Moore as head coach, and nothing against Kellen Moore. He seemed like a fine choice at the time. It just kind of seemed like they settled. It wasn't the best option out there. Obviously, you had Ben Johnson out there. You had Mike Vrabel. There was a few other guys where you could have gone with that would have been a better decision, but it seemed like, unfortunately, they settled for Kellen Moore. And not only that, it didn't really seem like they had a lot of talent on either side of the football going into this year. And there was a lot of analysts and a lot of people that are paid to know this kind of stuff that were saying, hey, if you live in New Orleans and you're a Saints fan, you should probably find something better to do on Sundays. And going into it, I completely agreed with them. I was like, wow, that's true. It's unfortunate. This Saints team doesn't really have a lot to look forward to this year. But it all changed. And I'll tell you exactly when it changed. It changed when they started Tyler Shough. Man, I know there was a lot of memes about Tyler Shough when he was first drafted, like, wow, this guy's unserious. How could they draft this guy over Shador? But he was awesome this year, and it was so much fun to watch. And the balls that he throws, they're not like soft balls. It's not like they're like ducks, but they're not like absolute like piss missiles either, where like you have third-degree burns when you're trying to catch these kinds of balls. Like he throws these balls that they're accurate, and they hit the guy in the chest, and they got some touch on them. It was awesome seeing Tyler Shough grow, especially after watching him in the preseason and seeing that there wasn't a whole lot that really impressed me. during his performances in the preseason, and that's why I always say you should never read too much into the preseason. A lot of these guys are not really taking it serious, or they don't even know the offenses that they're running or their defenses that they're running. It's just a good way to evaluate players that are going to be probably second or third stringers. But this team, they had a healthy Chris Olave for the first time in God knows how long. He had 1,100 total yards, 4 touchdowns. Tyler Shuck came in. He started winning some ball games, man. He was playing spoiler. He came in. He beat the Bucks. He beat the Panthers. He was playing spoilers. And then on the defensive side of the ball, they had production from Kool-Aid McKinstry, one of the funnest names to say in the entire NFL, and then Demario Davis. He's still doing his thing. It was awesome to see this team actually overperform expectations, especially regarding the fact that they were expected to have the number 1 overall pick this year and projected by many different sources to have the number 1 pick this year. So I don't know if Tyler Shuck is going to win the Rookie of the Year award this year. If I had a vote, I would probably vote Tyler Shuck. I know that Jackson Dart makes a pretty good case, especially if you play quarterback for the New York Giants and you actually play pretty well. There's going to be a lot of national media headlines around you. So Jackson Dart will probably end up winning it, or maybe Teteroa McMillan. He's had a hell of a season too. But if I had a pick, if I had a vote, I really do hope that Tyler Shuck ends up winning it, because he has totally turned this program around, and he's made otherwise irrelevant NFL team look like an actual relevant team, even after they were far, far eliminated from the playoffs by week 7 or week 6, so it was a lot of fun to watch, and I'm excited to see his growth, and I hope he can continue his growth, not against the Broncos, of course, but I hope he can continue his growth and develop into an NFL quarterback, and into an elite NFL quarterback, I should say. Now, as for the grade, I will give the New Orleans Saints a B+ on the season. You started off pretty rough. Spencer Rattler was struggling, but once Tyler Shuck came in, it all turned around, and now you have a lot of high hopes for next year and the years prior, or the years beyond. You got some good weapons. It's gonna be a fun program to watch. I think Kellen Moore is doing his thing out there. I think he's coaching pretty well against all odds, and the Saints are gonna be a team to watch next year, at least in my opinion. We have to see how the free agency and the draft class goes, but I believe the Saints will be a good team next year. Now, we're on to the NFC West, last but not least, especially not least, and we're going to start off with the Seattle Seahawks. All right, now we're on to the Seattle Seahawks, and this one's pretty easy. I'll get straight to the point. This is an A+. There's not a lot of bad things you can say about this team. They started off pretty slow. They played against the San Francisco 49ers at the beginning of the season, and they lost in one of the last drives of the game, if not the last drive of the game, at home. And then they went on a run. They went on an absolute tear. They won 14 out of the next 16 games. Beat some teams in crunch time. Sam Darnold, even though there was times where he turned back into a pumpkin and he didn't look all that great, that defense carried him on their backs and carried him to the promised land of the number 1 seed of the NFC. With all that being said, Sam Darnold had a phenomenal season this year. You won 14 games. You're the number 1 seed of the NFC. Mike McDonald is a top candidate for Coach of the Year, and I believe it's either him or Liam Cohen that should get it. You had amazing production from Jackson Smith and Jigba. That defense is absolutely phenomenal. It's a top 3 defense in the league. They force turnovers. They rush to the ball. They're aggressive. They make moves. They got a good special teams unit, and they made one of the trades of the year at the trade deadline by trading for Rashid Shaheed, who totally changed that entire team and stretched the ball down the field, and you could throw the ball down the field. And he's an amazing punt returner, a very dangerous punt returner. So they got pretty much no weaknesses. This is probably my Super Bowl pick coming from the NFC side. You got a good quarterback who's won 14 games back-to-back. First quarterback to ever do that since Tom Brady. If you're in company with Tom Brady, I'll just say that's pretty good company to keep. So whatever your opinion on Sam Darnold is, they're the number 1 seed. You won't see them this weekend on Wild Card Weekend. They're going into the divisional round, and going into Seattle is a tough, tough place to play. So I firmly believe the Seahawks will be the NFC's representatives this year in the Super Bowl. If I'm wrong, I would be happy to be wrong. I'm not much of a Seahawks guy. Growing up, the Seahawks caused me a lot of pain when they beat the Broncos 43-8. So I'd be happy if I am wrong, but I don't think I am wrong. So we'll see. There's not a lot of bad things you can really say about this team. They have a two-headed monster, and with Zach Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker III. They have a beast of a tight end in Barner. They signed Cooper Kupp over the offseason, who has had a extremely underwhelming year, but he still makes crucial catches from here and there. It's been a lot of fun to watch this Seattle team because they just beat the crap out of these teams. It's not like the Broncos where they just keep it close and they kind of play chess with you. The Seahawks will just pound, and just keep pounding you. Even when they're up by 28, they're still pounding. They blow you out. They don't care. They're going to keep scoring points. They don't slow down. And especially when you can score points both on the offense, defense, and special team side of the ball, it's really hard to put this team away. Now, I think their biggest weakness in terms of other teams in the playoffs, teams to watch out for, would be the division rivals. Both the 49ers and the Rams might have something to say about it. I don't think any other team would beat this Seahawks team, but if it did happen, I believe it would be a division rival, because at the end of the day, division rivals, those games are different. Those games, you really never know which way it's going to go, whether the team is 15-2 or the team is 2-15. Those people and players always show up, and coaches always show up, and they're always a little extra motivated when it comes to divisional games. So watch out for the 49ers and watch out for the Rams if the Seahawks do not end up being the representatives of the NFC. So obviously these guys get an A+. Next up, we're going to discuss the Los Angeles Rams. The Los Angeles Rams had a pretty interesting season. I know I say that about a lot of teams, but they were a lot of people's picks for the NFC side of the Super Bowl this year. And frankly, I was actually one of those people. I thought the Rams were going to make a lot of noise this year. I thought that they were going to represent the NFC in the Super Bowl, and they still very well could. Don't get me wrong, they still very well could, but the wheels kind of fell off towards the end of the season, and they were able to regain some momentum when they played against the Arizona Cardinals Week 18, and they absolutely crushed them. But there's a lot of things that you see from this Rams team where you're like, wow, this team on paper is practically unbeatable, but when you see them in person, you think, wow, these guys are actually beatable. And they have nobody to blame but themselves, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who are beating themselves. You don't really see the Rams losing a game where they get outplayed. You see games that the Rams lose when they make a lot of mistakes. And it's quite unfortunate, because they are certainly one of the best teams in the league. And that two-headed monster they got at wide receiver with Davante Adams and Puka Nacua. By the way, Davante Adams, when I saw that they signed Davante Adams over the offseason, I didn't blink twice. I was like, okay, he's washed up. Who cares? It's not 2020 anymore. It's not 2019. What is Davante Adams going to do for that offense? Boy, was I wrong. And boy, did I pay for it in real life and in fantasy football, because that guy was torching, especially when Puka went out a couple of games due to injury. Man, Davante had an absolute hell of a season. And it was interesting, too, because Matt Stafford, if you look throughout his entire career, he kind of locks in on one receiver, specifically one or two receivers, and then he just force feeds them the ball every single game, every single season. He did that during his younger playing career with Calvin Johnson, which was the right decision, because that's Calvin Johnson at the end of the day. But, now he did it with Cooper Kupp, he did it with Puka Nacua, and now this year it looked like he did it with Davante Adams. So it was totally awesome to see a team that has very few weaknesses, if any weaknesses at all, on both sides of the football, play and win a lot of games. And they have a great coaching staff, one of the best coaches, if not the best coach in the league, with Sean McVay. Matt Stafford, he's an elite quarterback, and he's a future Hall of Famer, and he's my pick for MVP this year. They got Kyron Williams, they got Puka, Devontae Adams, and they have the three-headed monster at tight end, and you don't know who is who whenever they catch the ball. It's like, is that Higbee? Is that Parkinson? Like, who is that? You know, they got a good O-line. They got a monstrous young defensive line. They got a good secondary. It's interesting. I really love watching this Rams team. They always play entertaining games, and they play a good quality, watchable style of football. I would not be mad if they made it to the Super Bowl this year. Like I said before, I think it'll be the Seahawks, but I would not be mad if the Rams were to make it to the Super Bowl, and as long as it's not against the Broncos, I would not be mad if they won the Super Bowl either. There's a lot of likable guys on that team, and I'm just going to give them a B+. They would get an A if they won the division, but they kind of ran out of gas towards the end of the year, and they had some injuries, and they lost a lot of games where they should have won, where they just beat themselves, and Stafford threw a couple picks, or they fumbled, or like Kyron Williams on that Thursday night against the 49ers where he fumbled on the 1-yard line. Like, it was just a lot of games where they beat themselves, really. So there was also that game against the Eagles where they got into field goal range, and then Jordan Davis comes in and blocks the field goal and returns it for a touchdown in a game that they should have won, where they were up, I think, 21-6 or 28-6, and before the Eagles started coming back. So, like I said, the Rams don't lose games to their opponents, they lose games to themselves. That's why I'm going to give them a B+, and we're going to move on to the San Francisco 49ers. Now, the 49ers, I will just have to get my bias out of the way. The 49ers are not a team that I particularly enjoy watching, and I can't really place my finger on it. I don't know why. They have a lot of good players. They have a lot of talent, but for some reason, I don't like them to succeed, and I don't like seeing them win. And it's interesting. I can't really put my finger on it. I don't know why I hate them. It's just one of those teams that you irrationally hate. So with that being said, I did have to get that out of the way. I do believe Brock Purdy has made some great strides this year when he has been healthy, and he's been a lot of fun to watch. Kyle Shanahan, another one of those coaches who's one of the best in the league, if not the best coach in the league. And the fact that he's taken that team that's been absolutely decimated with injuries, and he's taken them to being one win away from the NFC 1 seed is actually pretty phenomenal. So I have to give credit where credit is due, even though I have a little bit of biases. But I will say the offensive side of the football is almost impossible to stop. They have an enormous amount of talent on that offensive side of the football. They have a great O-line. They got Brock Purdy, who's been doing his thing. They got CMC, who, when healthy, is one of the best running backs in the entire league. They got Ricky Pearsall, they got Jawan Jennings, they got George Kittle, who's one of the best tight ends in the league, if not the best tight end in the league right now. So on the offensive side of the ball, they're borderline unstoppable, and they've played in such amazing games to watch this year, especially when they've been healthy. Even when Brock Purdy was out with injury due to that turf toe, and they had Mac Jones coming in, they were even pretty fun to watch with Mac Jones. But on the defensive side of the ball, like I said, they've been devastated with injuries on the defensive side of the ball, specifically Fred Warner and Bosa, and they really haven't been able to stop a nosebleed. I mean, we saw a career day out of Phillip Rivers, that game where Phillip Rivers came in and he tossed for, I think it was a Monday night game where he tossed for like 3 or 4 touchdowns against that Niners team. And obviously, I mean, that last drive where he threw that pick six, that was, I mean, it's kind of a desperation drive at the end when they were down by like 2 possessions, because that Colts defense just could not have any answers for that Niners team. So, you know, this one's kind of tough to grade, but I'm going to give them a B+. If they had won that last game against Seattle in San Francisco and secured the 1 seed, then I believe that they would have gotten an A+. But since they lost that game meant a lot, and now they're the 6th seed, and they're going to go up against Philly in Philadelphia. And I mean, they have a good chance of winning against Philadelphia, but that's a lot tougher of a place to play than having a bye week and getting an extra week to rest and recover and get some of those guys that you lost due to injury to come back and help you push for a Super Bowl run. Not only that, but the Super Bowl is literally being played in San Francisco this year. So if you had won that game against Seattle, you would not have had to leave San Francisco all throughout the entire January and February. If you had made it to the Super Bowl, you wouldn't have hopped on a plane a single time throughout that entire playoff run, which would have been absolutely phenomenal. And they could have done it and they should have done it and they didn't do it, and that's why they're getting a B+. And last but not least, we got the Arizona Cardinals, but I should say last and least because they were one of the worst teams in the NFC this year and they get a total F for this year. Credit to them for firing Jonathan Gannon. I don't believe Jonathan Gannon is a bad coach by any means, but anytime you go 3-14, especially after starting off the season 2-0, could you imagine? Do you remember? Let me take you back to week 2. At the end of week 2, the Arizona Cardinals are 2-0, and they end up finishing 3-14. It was absolutely abysmal, and it was quite unfortunate. They had I touched on this in the previous episode where one of the games they lost was against the Titans, and that was one of the Titans' only wins of the entire year, where it was just one of the flukiest, miraculous wins that I've ever seen an NFL team have. But we're not going to get into it again. If you want to know more about it, you can listen to the previous episode. Skip forward to the Titans section. Anyways, so the Arizona Cardinals this year, just an absolute bummer to watch. Besides that game against Dallas on, I believe it was Monday Night Football, this team did not put up a fight at all. Kyler Murray, he got injured, and pretty much we've seen the last of Kyler Murray in a Arizona Cardinals uniform this year. They were one of the worst teams in the of the entire league. They're getting a top 5 draft pick. There's not much you can really say about this team. I don't even know if they really had any high expectations going into this year, especially with that playing in one of the most dangerous divisions in all of football. I know I'm rambling quite a bit, but this is just not a team that I really want to talk about for 10 plus minutes. It's just this team gets an F. Credit to them for firing Gannon. They have some solid pieces. I think their flash of the season or their highlight of the season was not their wide receiver in Marvin Harrison Jr., but it was actually their wide receiver in Michael Wilson. That guy was totally awesome to watch, and it was nice to see Jacoby Brissett, aka Jacoby Brisket, toss around the rock and still do his thing. And I just love watching those veteran guys who know how to run an offense. Obviously, he wasn't put in the right position to succeed, but I just love those veteran guys who can just run an offense and do his thing and show you the reasons why he's a pro, because there was a lot of games where he kept them in it. He kept it pretty close. Like there was a game against Jacksonville that Jacksonville barely pulled away at the end, and a game against the Packers. There was, I think, a game against the Colts as well, back when the Colts were rolling. So it was, Jacoby Brissett, he definitely made this team a lot more watchable, especially when he was tossing the rock down the field to my main man, Michael Wilson. What an absolute joy it was to see him succeed this year. And I actually traded for him in fantasy, so I'm a little biased because he was putting up a bunch of fantasy points every single week, and nobody had even heard about the guy. So hopefully he can continue to develop and become one of their star receivers next year. But in terms of their weaknesses, it's pretty much everything else. They don't have a lot of guys. I know they got Josh Sweat, so they got a semi-decent pass rush. But if you ask me what the Arizona Cardinals need to draft next year, I'd tell you a team. They need to draft a team. They need to draft a quarterback. They need to draft an O-line. They need to draft a running back, so that way they can stop giving the ball to frickin' Emari DeMarcado and Bam Knight. Like, I was just totally disgusted just saying those names out loud. It's like, can we get some real running backs? And you can't talk about the Arizona Cardinals, last but not least, without talking about Trey McBride, probably the best tight end in the entire league right now. And nobody even cared, or nobody even looked and saw what he done, because he was having some record-breaking stats over this year, and to the surprise of no one, but also to the eyes of no one, because nobody was really even watching the Arizona Cardinals. So shout out Trey McBride. He's a CSU guy, and he was definitely one of the only shining spots, along with Michael Wilson this year. Have to give my flowers to McBride, and hopefully next year they can come in with a better attitude, they come in with a better head coach, and they can come in with some more talent and we can see them actually perform. For a while now, I think that they're going to be a bad team, or at least a semi-decent bad team where they're probably winning only 6 games, at least for the formidable future. This is not a quick rebuild. I think this rebuild is going to take a year or two, depending on the coach that they hire at the end of the day and the choices they make in free agency and the draft class. Anyways, that is it. That is it for the episode 2 Bring the Sink podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. I tried to make it a little bit shorter this time around. I know 2 hours on an opening episode wasn't really the greatest idea, but hey, you live and you learn. I do not know if I'm going to make a wild card picks and preview for the wildcard weekend, I should say, but I will see. I will see if I have time. Hopefully it'll be a shorter episode if I do have the time and I do have the free time to find out how to do it and find out. But if I don't find the time, I will at least try to post something on my Instagram about my picks for this weekend's ball games. So if you're not already following me on Instagram, go ahead and follow me. That's at Bring the Sink Pod. Again, that's at Bring the Sink Pod. Thank you guys so much for listening. Please like, comment, and subscribe. You know the whole drill. And I will see you guys next time for episode 3. Peace.